The gentleman from Alexandria, Mr. Levine.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, Friday morning I spoke in recognition of Holocaust Remembrance Day. And though this may be the greatest evil that humanity faced in scale and scope in the 20th century, I really didn't think I'd be speaking on it again so soon. But I spoke on it Friday morning, and Friday afternoon I was horrified to read the President's new executive order. The Holocaust happened 70-odd years ago, and we've studied it. And after the Holocaust, people said, never again. But sometimes I think the lessons need to be remembered. Throughout Europe, men and women and children of the Jewish faith were pulled out of their homes, thrown into cattle cars, crowded cattle cars, and taken to gas chambers. They were murdered not because of opposition to the Nazi regime. They were murdered for simply existing. Indeed, they could convert to Christianity and they would still be murdered. I think it's important for this body, and I think most of the members of this body do know what's going on in Syria right now. In Syria right now, men and women and children are being murdered, not for opposition to the Assad regime, but simply for existing. The regime is using something called barrel bombs with the assistance of people like the dictator of Russia, Vladimir Putin, and Iran and Hezbollah. These barrel bombs are full of shrapnel and explosives, and their goal is to flatten entire villages and neighborhoods. Even the term barrel bombs is a euphemism, because these bombs are the size of the dumpsters you see outside of 7-Elevens. They are massive. They take an entire neighborhood or village teeming with life and immediately turn it into a graveyard. Now, I've been speaking out against what Assad is doing in Syria for 5 years now. I actually criticized President Obama because I didn't think he was doing enough. But we need to understand that when the President of the United States permanently bans refugees from Syria, lawful refugees, people who have their papers in order, people who've been vetted for 2 years, simply trying to have life. Well, I'm reminded of 1939. I'm reminded of the SS St. Louis that set sail with more than 900 German Jews, circled around the United States until the people on that ship were sent back to Europe, where hundreds died in the gas chambers. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I know that most of you are horrified by this decision, but I think you need to speak out. This decision, according to press reports, was made without consulting the Department of State, the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, the National Security Council, Customs and Immigration, the Office of Legal Counsel. Even hundreds of members of the Foreign Service have written a letter in dissent. And I also want to remind you that it's not just Democrats speaking out. Senator McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham have given very strong statements against this. One of the most powerful statements I've seen is from someone who used to be the governor of Indiana, Governor Mike Pence, who tweeted in December of 2015, calls to ban Muslims from entering the U.S. are offensive and unconstitutional. The Speaker of the House, Paul Ryan, said in December of 2015, this is not who we are as a party or a country. He said calls to ban Muslims violates both the First Amendment of the Constitution, protecting freedom of religion, and the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, guaranteeing due process of law. He said, Paul Ryan said in December, freedom of religion is a fundamental constitutional principle. It is a founding principle of this country. This is not conservatism. What was proposed is not what this party stands for, and more importantly, it's not what the country stands for. And we went on to mention the many loyal, patriotic Muslims serving in our armed forces. And finally, I would have to note former President George W. Bush, who 6 days after September 11th had the dignity and the courage to stand up and say, the face of terror is not the true faith of Islam. This is not what Islam is about. Islam is peace. And he talked about the millions of Muslims among our citizens who make an incredible, valuable contribution to our country. I got to be frank. I come at this for the same reason I'm a very patriotic American. I am a Jew, and I know that if my family had not scraped together its meager savings, if my great-grandparents hadn't been able to do that at the turn of the 20th century, they would all have been murdered. America has always been a refuge for immigrants, a refuge for people all over the globe. I know a few of you in this chamber are descendants of Native Americans. I don't know anyone that is full-blooded Native American. My guess is everyone in this chamber is a descendant of someone who came from somewhere else. This is fundamentally who we are as a country. This is fundamentally who we are as Virginians. I know most of you oppose this. I ask you to speak out, now more than ever. Now that our Vice President, our Speaker of the House are being quiet, we need to encourage them to speak out. We need to speak and say never again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.